Hello, scholars. So today we are looking at one of the most important transitions in U.S. history. We're looking at how the United States went from becoming a global power facing its greatest economic crisis, the Great Depression, and how it's going to respond to that. So these three chapters really show a lot about cause and effect. Decisions made in foreign policy, economics, and government shaped everything that followed. So by the late 1800s, what we're looking at here is the United States had a rapidly growing economy. Businesses were producing more goods than Americans could actually consume, so they began looking outward to Latin America, Asia, and beyond for new markets. Where can we sell this excess of goods? And this led to what's known as American imperialism. It's a lot like colonialism, but we are doing like economy expanding as well, not really just taking over territories. We are going to take over territories because hopefully you guys understand the US, we actually have, I believe it's 7 territories under our jurisdiction, but it's not the same as what we had back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. But we use this expansion not just economically, but culturally. We had, as Americans, a duty to spread our values and our way of life. And the turning point came with the Spanish-American War in 1898. We entered that conflict claiming to support Cuban independence, which is that picture there. There's some soldiers from Cuba. But the outcome was much bigger than that. And the U.S. emerged with overseas territories and a new role as a global power. And you're going to read more about that in chapter 20. This expansion is going to continue into the early 1900s, with the U.S. using military force and economic influence to shape events in Latin America. So those of you that are not familiar, when we refer to Latin America in the United States, we mean basically like Central America. Mexico is sometimes included in that. So really think of like Mexico all the way down in Central South America. That is Latin America that we're talking about. And also, I don't know if I said this, into Asia. So, and the way that we do this is when Theodore Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt, is in office around the turn of the century, he's going to use what's known as big stick diplomacy. In other words, we're going to show military force. So we've really bulked up our military, and it's like, I dare you to challenge me. Look at what I'm doing. If you guys ever watched The Walking Dead, I can't remember the character's name, but he carries around the baseball bat with like the barbed wire. It's like, I dare you to mess with me. If you do, this is what's going to happen. I'm just going to beat you with my stick. That's exactly what Roosevelt is doing as like the US, like, I dare you to try to challenge us. And so that's what that political cartoon is picturing. Him with his big stick. So it's carry a big stick, but speak softly. I'm not going to raise my voice. I'm not going to do this back and forth with you. You come after me. I'm going to roll out my military on you. So that's what that big stick diplomacy is basically saying. So World War I breaks out, and it starts out, we have the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and that really sparks the Great War, which is later going to become known as World War I. The U.S., we try to stay neutral, but economic ties to the Allies and German submarine attacks on ships eventually pull us into the war in 1917. Woodrow Wilson, he's president at the time, and he framed the war as a moral mission to make the world safe for democracy. At home, what we see is the war is going to lead to some major changes. The government took control of industries, promoted propaganda, and limited civil liberties of U.S. citizens. And this shows us how quickly government power can expand during a time of crisis. And we're going to see this again in World War II. But when the war ends, we enter a period of economic growth throughout the 1920s. And hopefully you've studied this. This is like the roaring 20s, like Great Gatsby, everything in excess, right? Factories produced more goods than ever before. Americans bought cars, appliances, and new technologies, such as like the refrigerator, the vacuum cleaner. But much of this consumption was built on credit, using credit cards, not on actual money. Buy now, pay later. At the same time, though, there are some very serious weaknesses that we are overlooking. Wealth is not evenly distributed. You have this huge gap between the rich and the poor. Farmers and workers are struggling. They can't even make enough money to like pay rent, pay their mortgage on their homes. Businesses produce more than people could actually afford, and the stock market became increasingly risky. So while the 1920s looked like a boom, it really wasn't. It was a very, very fragile system just waiting to boil over. Also during the 1920s, I do want to mention this really quickly, but if those of you that are really interested in like minority histories and you're really interested in African American studies, this was the time of the New Negro movement and the Harlem Renaissance. I'm not assigning you to read chapter 21 about the Great Depression, but if you want to go back, you can access that in the book, in your textbook, in the ebook. Just go to chapter 21 and you can read more about that. There's also a lot of discrimination that's taking place during the 1920s. One of the most powerful ones that we can see is what happens to Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma. That is something that also we are starting to look more at because for a long time it was overlooked in history. But I encourage all of you to look that up, Google that, and find out more about that. Basically, whites got jealous of the rich blacks in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and burned their businesses, their neighborhoods, everything down. And the government was like, oops, sorry. So that was something that was brushed over a lot in the past, but now we're really starting to raise awareness about that incident. And there's tons of videos out there that you can watch about that. But moving on, let's talk about the Great Depression really quickly because this is chapter 22. So the system, it collapsed. Black Tuesday, in October 1929, that's when the stock market crashes. Banks are going to fail. Businesses are going to close. Millions of Americans are going to lose their jobs, and people lived in poverty. Many people lost their homes. Many people are going to die of starvation. It's just bad. President Herbert Hoover, what he tries to do is he believes the government should play a very limited role. He encouraged businesses and charities to help out, but this approach, it's just not enough. It was too far gone for that. That was a Band-Aid on wet skin. It was never going to work. The effects were devastating, especially for minority communities who face even greater discrimination and economic hardship. The first ones fired are your minorities, right? They're the first ones to be let go. They're the first ones to be dismissed. They're not going to be helped throughout the Depression. So in 1932, though, Hoover has a competitor when he's running for the presidency, and it's this guy, FDR, Franklin D. Roosevelt. He is going to run on a platform called the New Deal, and he's like, I have answers. I have ways to get us out of this depression. Hoover doesn't. And he wins the election because he had a plan to save everyone. And this marked a major shift when he introduces the New Deal. The federal government took a much more active, intrusive role in the economy and people's lives. And the New Deal, what it does is it focused on creating jobs for people, supporting banks, helping farmers, and creating Social Security, which is something that we still use today. It didn't completely end the Great Depression, but it did change how Americans viewed the role of government. Oh, they're going to step in more and help now. So when we look at this period, we do see a clear chain of events. We see expansion in global power with American imperialism. We see economic growth built on unstable foundations. We see collapse and crisis, and then we see government response and reform. Understanding these causes and effects, that helps us understand and see how decisions in one era can shape the future in powerful ways. That's why the government comes in so heavy-handed during FDR's time, and we really see government stepping up and playing such an important role from about 1932 to the present.